Curious about the paranormal? Look no further. Paranormal M brings you real-life stories that challenge the laws of reality. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell to keep up with our otherworldly adventures. Is someone watching me? We've moved into a new house, and some odd things have been happening since we've been here. My wife is aware of activity, and she's walked into our bedroom one night to a black figure sitting on our dresser, looking in my direction as I slept. Nothing has happened since bar-smelling cigarette smoke every now and then, but we got that at our last place too. She told me earlier today that a couple of nights ago she woke up to see someone standing at the bottom of the bed, but to my right side. She asked, "What are you doing?" No answer, and this black figure walked from the wall to the door across the room and stood there. She said to it, "Do you realize I can still see you, right?" Then it went. I've not seen anything, but a lot is gone in my life, or a lot's been going on, rather. Main ones are a new position in my job, which is causing me to be exhausted daily. Also, this last week, my mom's come to contact with her biological father, who she's never met before. I was the one who dived into the history, finding her grandfather who passed, and then finding her dad. So there's a lot of emotion at the moment. Also, my dad's been having problems health-wise. A side note, a few weeks ago I had a dream. I had driven my car alone to a park, walked to a graveyard where I saw a woman pushing a pram and visiting a grave. I turned to leave her, and as I entered the park, a man was shouting, "Get out of here, you know you're not allowed here, right?" I asked what was going on. His reply, "The man who came in your car was trying to enter, but he's not allowed in here." I was alone in the car, so I asked who this man was. The guy said his name was Michael, my wife's father's name, who had passed away before I met her. He wanted to tell you everything was going to be all right. My thought within my dream was, WTF? Why is he trying to enter my dream? What's going on? Signs from my father. When we got to the hospital, the morning of the 22nd, he passed within 30 minutes of my mother and I arriving in the room. He was medically brain dead and hooked up to so many machines that were keeping his vitals stable. What I thought was the craziest part was a minute before we lost him and we were saying our goodbyes. I noticed he had a small tear come from his left eye and pointed it out to my mom. I'd like to think that he was saying his goodbye to us as well, even though we couldn't hear him. I had my phone on a table that was about 4 feet away from us. A couple moments after the passing, Siri was randomly going off. I took comfort in knowing that he held on to us for so long that he could still say his goodbyes. The next morning on our drive home from the hospital, roughly 2.5 hours away from our hometown, right when we got off the exit to get home, I get a notification from eBay. Last summer, he got a couple of NASCAR jackets to flip on eBay. One sold back in September, and the notification that I got was the second jacket sold. I thought to myself, this is too much to be a coincidence for it not to be a sign. Over the next few days, when we were figuring out life insurance policies and such, my mother got visibly angry because she took out an extra policy for him. But supposedly he didn't have any extra for himself. Don't get me wrong, we aren't greedy or anything like that. Hell, I don't care if I get a dime. I just want my mom to be taken care of and minimize her worries. I was about to get ready to meet the priest. The phone rings and it says invalid number. That's what shows up on the caller ID. I never answer unknown calls, but I didn't want my mother to deal with it, so I picked it up. I said hello a couple of times, and then the sound of a broken cell phone comes through, and the voice sounded like that of a man in his mid-20s that was real sad. It said, "Don't worry," or "No worries." Breaking up noise. "Where are you? Miss you." Break up noise. "With Grandpa, love you." I said what a couple of times, and then the phone hung up. I was baffled. I looked at the number again, and instead of a 1-800 number, the number was 11-800. I did a reverse lookup of the number, and it was some communication company. I decided to call the number, and it was a standard touch menu. I stopped at that. Turns out, since time has passed, more things were sorted out and she didn't have to worry. There were secret accounts or policies or anything like that. I've had signs here and there from him. He's even shown up in my room once when I was sleeping. My mother's signs have been things that she had disappear only to reappear. Her big one that she got, and took a bit for her to realize it. My parents' lawn was one of my dad's pride and joys. He wouldn't let anyone touch it at all and was very particular on how it was cut. He would joke with my mother, "When I'm gone, who's going to take care of the lawn?" To which she would just hold up the phone and say, "Hello, lawn boy." About 2 weeks after his passing, a landscaper called and left a message, asking if she would like a price for the quote for the lawn. She didn't call back, and a couple of days later, the person called again and left the same message. Then it clicked for her. That was a sign for her. Mind you, it was December in Wisconsin. No one is worried about their lawn at that time. Here's some other things from different family members. The day after his passing, one cousin shot the biggest buck of his life. My father had his heart attack while he was out at deer camp. One of his sisters he's close with said that he found a white feather on his writing desk the morning after he passed. One of my other cousins, who was the funeral director and worked with a few years toward the end of his life, had a dream that seemed too real. She said that she went over to the house and he was in the garage putzing around having a cigarette in his usual habitat. She said to him, "Uncle Mickey, what are you doing here? You're dead." To which he said, "Yeah, I know, but I'm doing just fine." Like I said, she said it seemed like one of those dreams that was too real. Now for what we found out today. My dad owned a barbershop for roughly 30 years. Today my mother went to the shop to give the guy he mentored one of his clippers as a memento. He showed her a picture. It was a picture of an old customer, or rather one that an old customer took. The picture was of a hearse parked in front of the barbershop. I guess the guy took the picture because he saw it there when he went into the store. When he came out 20 minutes later, it was still there, so he snapped it because he thought it was funny. Well, the date of the picture, November 21st, the day my dad had his heart attack. Visitations from a very close friend of mine. I'm going to preface this with a backstory. In fall of 2001, I met Susie in English class. I was assigned the seat directly behind her. Her first words to me were, "I love your jacket. My name's Susie, by the way." And from a handshake and a smile, developed an incredible bond between two strangers over many years. As high school went on, and we met in 9th grade, our friendship blossomed and grew. We confided in each other and we helped each other. Yeah, she helped me more. I sucked at math. We protected each other. She almost fought an ex-girlfriend when she found out that she dumped me for no apparent reason other than I was too nice, quote-unquote. We were there for each other and we loved each other. It wasn't a romantic thing, though. It was a unique type of love that to this day I've not experienced again. I was brother to her, not Robert. And to me, she was my baby sister, something I still cherish to this day as I never had a sister. Getting closer to graduation, we talked about what we were planning to do. I was dead set on enlisting in the military, much to her horror. And as brothers and sisters do, we bumped heads, and sadly there was a small falling out between us in this regard. Graduation came, I enlisted. I went off for training. A year passed before we reconciled. I found out that she had enlisted as well, and was due to leave in a few months, and this was sometime in 2005. We picked up where we left off, and we kept in touch as best as we could while we were away from each other and home. Years passed and I got out of the service while she remained. Through this time, I met my now wife, and we found out that we were expecting. A very short time later, maybe 1 or 2 weeks, Susie let me know that she was expecting as well, and that she would be coming home in a few months once her baby was born. Our kids are about 2 months apart. In 2011, she came home, and a group of old high school friends threw her welcome home party. We hugged after many years, laughed and caught up, and I met her baby. It was the greatest feeling in the world at the time, being a new dad myself as well, and seeing my little baby sister and mom. In October of 2011, I lost Susie in a vehicle accident. I was at work when I found out. My reaction was to keep working. We all have different reactions when it comes to tragedy. Mine, unfortunately, was to bury myself so deep into work that it just never happened at all, and everything was fine. I didn't attend the funeral. I ignored calls from friends, and work took priority. And it worked until 2013. Here's the story. My wife gave birth to our second child in October of 2013. Due to the birth of having complications and the proximity of the hospital to her parents' home, we stayed at my in-laws for about 1.5 months. One day I went to bed as usual, having the next day off from work. And I dreamt I was outside of my old high school. In this dream, I could make out details. I could see people and faces, colors and smells. I knew I was waiting for someone because I was across the street from the dismissal gate. I heard the bell ring announcing school is out. I saw students stream out, street signals turning red and green, students laughing and talking. Very vivid details. And all of a sudden, every sound was toned down to a gentle whisper. And I see Susie walking out from the dismissal gate. Purple blouse, purple backpack. Yep, purple was her favorite. And jeans, holding a book to her chest. She crossed the street towards my direction, and she should have seen me directly in front of her, but it was almost as if she was in her own world and I was just a ghost in her world. She walked past me and I kept calling her by her name, but she didn't reply. I must have called out to her at least 6 or 7 times, and she finally turned. Her eyes met mine, and she came back running to me with the biggest smile ever. And she hugged me. I can't describe the feeling, but I felt it. I physically felt her body and her grip. I held her tightly, and she pulled away and said the following. "Brother, where have you been? I've been wanting to come and have you visit me." I just remember saying, "I'm sorry, I've been wanting to, but I've been so busy at work." As I was responding to her, she let go of me, backed away, smiled, and started walking back in the direction that she was heading, north. I told her to wait and asked her where she was going. She said, "I'm sorry, but I have to go. We'll talk soon." She just kept walking. I started to call out to her again, and she just kept walking. By this point, I remember I started to cry while I was calling out to her, and the next thing I knew, I woke up from my sleep. I sat up in bed and saw my wife feeding her newborn, looked at my oldest son sleeping next to me, and just started bawling in a way I haven't since I was a child. It must have been at least 30 or 45 minutes worth of crying. My wife put her baby down in his crib. They came and asked what was wrong. I told her what had happened and how real it was, how real it felt. She said it was a visitation, and it was meant to finally bring peace and closure to the fact that I never said goodbye to Susie. A few weeks afterwards, I finally visited her resting place. It took me at least a year after that event to fully accept the fact that my little sister was gone. I've had 2 smaller things that happened after this. Around 2014, I decided to get a memorial tattoo with her name and a quote from a song that struck a chord with me while I was still healing from this. The day after I got the tattoo, I dreamt I was at work, and again it was vivid. The smells, colors, faces, even the heat. I could tell it was summer. I was taking a break and sipping some water, and again the volume on everything became toned down. And I see Susie walking towards me, the same big smile on her face. She says nothing, grabs my arm, looks down at the tattoo, looks at me and says, "I love it. Thank you," and walks away in the same direction that she came from, north again, and I wake up, but instead of crying, I smiled and just said a quiet thank you to her. Just last week was my most recent experience. My wife said that she was tired and asked if it was okay to go get takeout. I said yeah, that was fine. I told her if she could get Burger King, since it was close, maybe only a half-mile away. She said it was fine, but she'd rather get something else. I think it was chicken. Anyways, this meant that she had to go in another location. That was out of the way, maybe 2 miles away, I believe. She came back and asked me if I could get the food ready for the boys while she went to go use the restroom. I obliged and began to unbag the meals for the kids. The kids' meal with a toy. And I paused when I saw the toy. I stood there and I was just smiling and laughing. My wife came back and asked what was funny. I showed her the toy. It was a Powerpuff Girls toy. She said, "Okay, so what's the big deal?" I told her, "Well, this is Buttercup." Funny story, these last 2 days at random times I've been remembering Susie. I've just been having memories flood back, and Buttercup was her favorite character from the cartoon. I'd like to think that Susie's been saying hi, and not just this week, but for the last few years. Could these experiences be chalked up to the guilt of just having ignored her passing? Maybe, but I know that it's not. I know somewhere my little sister's keeping an eye on me and saying hi from time to time. A bond like that we shared doesn't just disappear when, So wherever you are, Susie, I love you and I miss you. Not just on Memorial Day or your birthday, but every day. But I'm happy knowing that you're around. And if you made it this far, thanks for your time, and I apologize for the long story. I hope it brings a smile to someone who needs one, especially with everything going on around us. Reach out and tell your family and friends that you love them and let them know how much they mean to you. If there's one thing I learned from this, it's to say to those around you that you love them while you're alive and let them know while they're still here too. Black figure or shadow. First typing this and then telling the story happened last night. Last night I was smoking. Late at night, because my mom doesn't like that I smoke. I live in a neighborhood where you can hear the city, and at the same time not really being a part of it. But you can still hear birds and see animals walking around, including deer because of the patches of forest that we have here. Basically, I live somewhere with middle-class people, but decent-sized lots to retire in. Note, I'm talking about Austin, Texas, where it gets quite expensive. The point of me telling you all this is that last night, like each night, I stay up late to 3 or 4 a.m., except Saturday night. To see how the market's doing, I tend to get a little anxious if I'm down or up. Either way, I sparked one up, and I called my friend over the phone. I was talking with her since it was 1 a.m. We haven't seen each other in over a year, and she's a mother now. There's plenty to talk about. At one point, she asked me what I was doing. She sounded a bit concerned, and I asked if, she was doing all right, if there was something wrong. I was confused because we had smoked together before. She said that she thought she had heard something. I was confused and took off my left earbud. The reason behind was because I believe my right ear, for some reason, listens better. So I did, and around 2:30 a.m. I hear a branch snap. Not like the movies where it's just one huge snap. It sounded like it was slowly pushed or pressed in, where leaves move around it in the process. I'm not much of a paranormal believer, so I tell my friend what happened. She hates scary stories and believes everything. She wears gold because apparently it deters away witches, which is kind of funny. I don't even think that's how it works. Also, people put scissors next to their babies at night. That's supposed to deter witches as well. She tells me to go inside, but I remind her the one time. where we were driving to my house around 2 a.m. and something hit my car, the top part of my Corolla 2014 S. The reaction of anyone would concern and a little bit anger, since it could have been anything. Maybe a neighbor throwing something at me or an accident like a branch falling. My reaction first was thinking that it was a neighbor because it sounded like a ball. Then when I step out of my car and it's a cemetery, dead silent, nothing at all, then I start thinking about how the rolling or hitting was, almost abounding like an animal breaking its fall then running away. I told her that night, and last night, that it was a duende. I don't know how to say duende in English. Sorry about me telling her the story that happened to us. It was kind of funny. It helped me forget about the branch cracking. That's when I started to walk home from the patio where I was smoking. Sorry, not telling y'all where I was. When I'm 10 feet away from my house, I feel this heavy sensation. The way I could describe it is like warmth and a lot of little spikes on top of the back of my neck. I decide to keep on walking when I'm touched by the doorknob and I look left to my neighbor's property. It's about 6 acres, or 0.6 acres. He always has a blue light turned on the back of his house as I look to see a black, dark figure, darker than the trees. It was a very dark night last night, so I don't think that there is any reflection of the moon. Maybe a new moon was out yesterday or close to it. This figure was 3 or 4 feet taller than me. I'm on top of a 5-foot deck to enter my house. This thing was huge, but very skinny for some reason. Maybe 1.5 feet across. I stood frozen for about 3 seconds, but it's true what they say. Time really does feel slower and longer. I see it move behind a tree, but I kept opening my eyes harder and harder, closing them and making sure I saw what I saw. I was looking at a person, I think, trying to see if the figure moved up and down, but it was sliding across. Zero sound all the way that I could tell that something was moving because the blue light my neighbor has. To end this story, I go inside my house, and I don't really think about it, but I wake up at 7 to make plays on the stock market. Investing in EEENF long term. Also, should I be concerned? I'm not much of a pussy. I'll smoke again tonight. I think there's a live stream option on Reddit. I'll be down to do that. What I think happened was the scary story. Maybe that got to my head, and I imagined something. It could be that simple. And maybe I just saw something else that was moving across my neighbor's property. I would believe it even more if it wasn't a tree, or I lost sight of the shadow or the black figure. Other than that, maybe I should just put y'all on my plug. Is there any truth to the suggestion that emotional distress invites or facilitates paranormal phenomenon? There have been a few times, probably a dozen occasions over the past 5 years of our relationship, where my fiancée was swept into a serious, dire headspace. It was and is a pretty dramatic departure from the person that I knew. She's bipolar and emotions are a lot more than just emotions for her. She's currently having a rough time, the worst in 9 months. And 2 things happened just this evening. A single wooden chair that sits adjacent to us as we lay on the couch made a thud and a whine against the tile floor, as if someone had slumped down into it. Our eyes were on the TV at the time, but we both jerked our heads towards it. The other was when I was alone in the study. A piece of folded paper at the end of my desk darted a few inches my direction. It was in the corner of my eye, granted, but I know what normal paper behaves like under gravity. This was flicked. Prior to these, I caught a door moving on its own and a trash can lid. Those flip ones, flipping on its own. It's only ever small and innocuous things, but it's always during these severe, depressive, or mixed episodes. I'm pretty rational, and I'm an intelligent person, but I also think instincts counts for something. I've spent 30 years around everyday objects like chairs and paper and doors, so I'd like to think I'm pretty familiar with how they should and shouldn't operate. She herself experiences much more distressing phenomenon too. Regular sleep paralysis, guaranteed hallucinations if we don't have a nightlight. And of course, they always get worse when her emotional stability declines. Her mother has a habit of sporadically declaring deaths as soon as we walk into a particular building. Sometimes she won't do it for months, and then she'll announce, insert person here, died, at this location, the moment that we cross the threshold, as though it's spoken through her rather than by her. Friendly entity tried to warn us of a fire. As a child, I lived with my parents and 3 other women who were renting a room in our flat. The building had only a ground floor and first floor, and we lived on a ladder. In the flat directly below us lived a married couple, and the husband's brother was staying over the night before the fire. I just want to mention all of this because I feel it would help the story make more sense. So the night before the fire, 2 of the women living with us stayed up past midnight playing cards on their bed. They said that they had felt something poking their bed from underneath. At first, they dismissed it, thinking one was trying to prank the other. But it kept happening until they realized it was neither of them doing it. They decided to just ignore it and go to bed since they have had previous experiences in the flat, but nothing that ever harmed them. Meanwhile, downstairs, the couple and the husband's brother were already in bed. The brother slept in the main bedroom that had a window facing the back of the building where the fire spread to first. He got up and complained to the couple that his bed was being shaken by something and he couldn't sleep, as he was obviously freaked out. The next morning, the fire happened, and only our flat and the flat below us were damaged. None of the other neighbors had any damage from the fire, and none of them experienced anything weird the previous night. It was also while we waited for the firefighters that the couple and the 2 women told my mother what they had experienced. My family likes to think that it was maybe an entity living in our home trying to warn us, since we already knew that it was living with us for the few years by then. And although it's shown itself a few times, it never did anything like that prior to that night. Sleep paralysis, or something darker? Growing up, I would see and hear horror stories of my older sister's sleep paralysis fits. As early as age 8, I recall feeling off in the early mornings or late at night and going to check on my sister. On several occasions, I would walk in and see her laying on her bed, on her back, eyes bulging out of her head as if signaling for me to help. Her mouth slightly ajar as faint sounds barely escaped her lips. Her fingertips would sometimes twitch, but it wouldn't be more than a few seconds. Before I'd start screaming for my parents to come rushing into the room, it terrified me. The sight of her like that, she was so helpless and fear plagued her eyes, as it would take only a few moments before she was able to vocalize anything. Now might be a good time to mention that I grew up in somewhat of a practicing Catholic household. I went to religious education classes, got confirmed, no meat during Lent, that sort of gig. The only one of my parents' 3 kids, I might add, to be confirmed. Now I say somewhat practicing because while my mother did her best to drag us to church every Sunday, my father wanted no part in it as we grew up Or I guess my father wanted no part in it, as he grew up with my devout third-world grandmother, who had him attending grade school with the nuns paddling him and whatnot. He was a burnt-out, needless to say. He was, and still remains, however, a man of science and reason. When things went bump in the night, my mom was in front and center with a rosary while my dad laughed and usually debunked whatever mystery was there. Regardless, every time we were scared at night, or if we had bad dreams we couldn't wake ourselves up from, my mom would tell us to pray and that we would all wake up fine. I would opt for an Our Father or a Hail Mary when it felt warranted. As my sister and I reached our teen years, she unfortunately got involved with drugs. I won't go into too much detail, but at its worst, she was utilizing heavy stimulants to support her multiple jobs and a full caseload in college. The only exasperated the fits that she had. It got to the point where she started sleeping with a crucifix underneath her pillow. This sounds crazy, I know. Even more so considering this course of action was being taken by the same person who dropped out of religious education classes for a fear of her edgy atheist boyfriend in high school maybe would judge her for it. As an older teen and then young adult, my parents, or more so my dad rather, after becoming aware of her past addiction, would blame her previous drug abuse for the reason that she suffered these episodes, for lack of a better term. He would shrug them off as maybe the mind punishing itself for the gift of personal afflictions that her family sustained during the course of her using. Yet still, it always felt more than that. She would report dark figures in her doorway, figures with red eyes that would put pressure on her chest. She would tell me how they laughed at her when she would pray for them to leave. Tears welling up in her eyes, and she would recall the accounts that took place the night before. She's older now in a serious relationship with her own family, years of sobriety under her belt, and little to no bad dreams these days, let alone sleep paralysis episodes. And then it was my turn. I'm a mom on the slightly younger side. I have a school-aged kid who still occasionally finds his way to my bedroom on those rare nights that he had a bad dream. I have a bed in which, when closed, if you will, is a twin size. When it's expanded, it's a bit larger than a queen. I mention this because while I don't move much in my sleep, it gets a bit cramped when I wake in the middle of the night to my son trying to squeeze his way in. One night, same as many other nights before, I felt him climb in. We sleep opposite each other when my bed isn't extended. And per typical 7-year-old sleeping behavior, he donkey kicks me throughout the night. Being a light sleeper, I wake up to the slightest whisper. Call it mom instincts, I guess. As such, I wake up frequently throughout the night, maybe 8 to 10 times on average due to discomfort or stress. Whatever might be happening, what have you. This night in particular, I had more difficulty than usual staying asleep. As a habit, I check my phone every time I wake up just to know how much longer I have before my alarm goes off. On this night, the last time I recall checking the time, it was about 3:09 a.m. I'm a side sleeper, and I was facing my wall and son as he slept. I'm unsure when I woke up, or if I really was that deep asleep when I felt a looming presence behind me. I felt that prickly feeling throughout my body and my mobility became restricted. It's hard to explain it, but I felt every fiber of my core telling me that I couldn't look back. I simply can't. I began having dark thoughts, and while I couldn't speak out loud, I started praying in my head. I couldn't pray correctly. My words were jumbled and my prayers were out of order and nonsense. I just felt this overwhelming feeling of fear and dread. Whatever it was, it just felt evil. Now, I've had my fair share growing up with whispers in the night, unexplained shadows and apparitions, impressions on my bed as a kid, you name it. But never have I felt the feeling of a dark entity. What's even more insane is that I could feel my son naturally stirring in his sleep, his legs on mine. I knew I had to be awake. It's been about a couple of months since that happened. I've had smaller episodes since. 2 nights ago, I was tossing and turning in my sleep when that dreadful tingling sensation occurred again. I felt something applying slight pressure to my neck, almost like fingers pressing down. Without opening my eyes, I immediately and mentally shouted out, "My God, it's stronger." And the feeling went away. It's odd because I've never said these words before, and when I said them, without thinking of them beforehand, I felt like I had only seconds to get them out. Before what happened, you might ask. I'm not sure. I also don't care to find out. I've read studies on sleep paralysis. I've also read up on the science behind it as well as the folklore it's been mentioned in for decades and decades. Being a decent combination of both of my parents, I prefer to find a rational explanation behind my experiences like my father would. However, I'm never foolish enough to fully trust science and abandon faith altogether. To summarize, it's terrifying, encompassing, consuming, and morbidly fascinating once it passes. Impossibly bright, human-shaped figure down the hall. When I was around 8 or 9, I lived in a large house that was built brand new. So new, in fact, my family paid for the lot that the house was built on. A suburban neighborhood, it was tucked between some mountains on a large hill. Growing up, I had more than my fair share of odd encounters at this house. Looking back now, I often wonder if the land that we were on had some sort of history. It's worth mentioning where I live. Native American artifacts have been discovered throughout the area. One night I had an uneasy feeling being alone in my room. I then opted to sleep in my parents' room, so I made my way out of mine. I had to make a sharp right down the hall to get to their room. As I turned the corner, I immediately saw a tall, blindingly bright figure standing in the middle of the hallway. It was so incredibly bright. It was hard to look at. Not that I wanted to, but the weird thing about it was that it didn't emit light. It just was light. I'm unsure if that makes sense to most, but I guess the way that I'd best describe it is like a 5-foot-plus figure of light that didn't illuminate the hall, but was just impossibly bright on its own. Fear kicked in immediately, and I instinctively buried my face in my arms and followed the wall past it. I was too scared to do anything else. To this day, I've not seen anything like it since. I've tried to rationalize it for a long time, but I come up with little explanation. You know when you're in a bright room and then once it goes dark, you see those bright flashes for a second while your eyes adjust? I thought it just may be that, but it doesn't make much sense for it to be the reason, as my bedroom's fairly dark, with the exception of a small nightlight in the wall. It doesn't seem drastic enough to change light to see spots. Also, this didn't occur right as I left my room into the dark hallway, but when I was walking down the hall and made a turn. I don't know. I've never looked much into it, but might do some research now that I've found this thread, and I've seen some of its users have explained something similar. My late mom emailed my sister for her birthday. A couple of years back, I met up with my sister for her 35th birthday, and she told me about something very strange that happened that day. She noticed an email in her inbox that appeared to be part of a chain between herself, the Beto Senate campaign, and me. It looked strange, so she opened it, thinking that she had mistakenly forwarded a campaign email to me and that I was now replying to her. Strangely, when she opened the email, there were no messages from me. At the top, sure enough, there was the Beto campaign email, but then below that was this old collection of emails between my sister and my mom from about 5.5 years earlier, when my mom was still alive. My sister had been opining at the time that she was almost 30, among other complaints, and my mom was giving her a lot of encouragement and also saying things like, "Lie about your age." Good old mom. My sister showed me her email on her phone, and I saw exactly what she was talking about with the email chain thing, and I got to look through them a bit. Unfortunately, she wouldn't let me read through in detail or forward it to me, because she was too embarrassed about the admissions that she'd been making to my mom so many years before, which I get. But it's too bad. I recently asked her if she could find the emails again, but they seem to have disappeared now, which is also pretty mysterious. At any rate, my sister felt, and also I feel, like this was our mom trying to reach out and give my sister this gift for her birthday. I mean, it doesn't seem like a huge thing at first, maybe a glitch, But in addition to the auspicious timing, this is just not how email works. I've never heard of an email glitch like this. Have you ever had a very old email chain show up in your inbox just short of attachment to a new email from a different person for no apparent reason, but it looks at first like it came from yet another person? Because I haven't. And the timing of this friendly ghost email isn't just notable because it was her 35th birthday. The other reason has to do with where my mom's ghost might have gotten the idea. Because when my sister told my dad about the emails, he sent her a screen snap of a text conversation that he had been having about my mom only 2 days earlier, in which he wrote the phrase, "Why can't we send emails to heaven?" I've often heard the idea that spirits are more on a level with electronics and technology, and they can manipulate it more easily than other things. So I just wonder if she got this idea from his text and somehow seized an opportunity. Ever since this happened, I find myself really pondering the nature of the afterlife. Is my mom literally always hanging around her family now that she's passed? What's that about? Honestly, it freaks me out a little bit, especially when I'm doing things I don't think she'd approve of. I feel a little weird even writing out this story. Hopefully, she's just around for special occasions and when people talk about missing her. What the hell just happened? I ordered 2 playbills online and had them delivered to mail to me. They're incredibly special to me. I keep them in a sealed bag. I would never be careless with them. I haven't had these playbills for very long. They came right at the end of January, at some point in February. I wanted to take a look at them, but I couldn't remember where I put them. I live alone in a small apartment. There aren't too many places to look, and there's no roommate around screwing with my stuff. I searched everywhere and the playbills were just gone. I remember while I was looking, I kept thinking, oh, they've got to be here, only to find that they weren't there. I have a pretty extensive collection of crystals, have an entire bookshelf dedicated to them. I don't keep anything on that shelf that isn't a crystal or doesn't have something to do with my crystals. I know every crystal in my collection, and I know where their precise spots are individually. So while searching for the playbills, I decided to check my crystal shelf. I was confident that they wouldn't be there, but I didn't know where else to look. On the bottom shelf, I have some small bags that I use to carry crystals, and I was unzipping them to look inside to see if somehow my playbills were in one of them. Gets weird here. I looked through a few bags with nothing, so was on to another one. When I opened the next bag, I felt as if it had something inside of it. I pulled it out and it was revealed as another, smaller bag that I had no recollection of. Inside that bag were 2 crystals that I'd never seen before. Like I said, I know all of my crystals and every crystal has its place. I have no clue where these 2 came from. Another thing I should add, I'm schizophrenic. I was so confused about this whole playbill crystal situation that I went into a psychotic episode. It was like 2 playbills had materialized into 2 crystals. My brain got pretty delusional with that. After that episode, I just tried not to think about it too hard. I knew that if I started thinking about it again, I'd go into another episode. Every time I had a thought about the playbills or crystals, I would quickly distract myself with thoughts of something else. So flash forward a few weeks till tonight. I was on my bed in my bedroom watching a video on my iPad. Out of absolutely nowhere, I had this urge to get up, walk out of the room and ask for my playbills back. So I did. I walked out of my bedroom and basically said to nothing and no one that there'd be no hard feelings if they could just put my playbills back somewhere I could find them. Then I walked back into my room and continued the video. A couple of hours later, I was on the couch and I started to get this sort of tingly sensation. It felt like my feet were falling asleep, but it wasn't sitting on them or anything weird or anything like that. I wanted to find a code for an online thing, and I knew that I had a code on a piece of paper in my room. I left the couch to go to my room and get the code. The code was in a drawer in a small table. I know I checked that exact drawer for my playbills. I know I did. I absolutely know it. I opened the drawer, and there was the paper with the code I needed, along with my 2 missing playbills. My life story with ghosts so far. This is a bit of a long story. Hey, I'm a 22-year-old German guy. I live in a pretty old area, so to speak. I found Bronze Age stuff here, and even a Stone Age stone burial kind of thing only 10 minutes away with the bike. The house we moved in, when I was around 4, was haunted. Maybe a bit tame, but still terrified me and my sister. I don't know how old the house is, but I had still ventilation holes in the sides to cool the house in the summer. The house is a 2-story house where the floors are 2 apartments. A bigger property about 3,000 square meters excluding the 3 garages in the house and the barn, all completely white on the outside. My sister told me later, she's older, that there was a pigeon with its breast and stomach cut open and intestines spilling out. My parents first looked at the house. The seller said it was one of the wild cats doing that, but there were no bites or scratches on it. We, my parents, my sister, and I, in the ground floor, my grandma upstairs, I would sometimes hear heavy footsteps in the middle of the night, which was odd for 2 reasons. First, my grandma was a very small, frail woman, and second, I wouldn't normally be awoken by this kind of stuff. I'm kind of a heavy sleeper, and you can make quite a bit of noise before I wake up. These footsteps managed it every time. In addition, I heard this really old bunny plushie, which my parents put in the bag, opposite my bed, so it would be looking at me while sleeping. My parents said I liked before. Well, I guess they said that I liked this thing before, but I didn't like it anymore after we moved in. I can just barely remember that the bunny sometimes seemed to kind of move at night. I brushed it off until it fell down. My parents put it over 10 centimeters back, so even if it would have fallen over, it would have fallen down. My parents got rid of it after my absolute refusal to keep it. I also had terrible nightmares almost every night, until the incident further down, after which I got a dream catcher, and it majorly improved. Also, I always got this unpleasant feeling walking around after 10 p.m., even when I got older. My grandma died of a sudden heart attack one time, on her way to the bathroom at night. When I was up there in the bathroom, and the small extra room with the hatch to the attic, both those places gave me the creeps. After my parents divorced and I got older, it got worse. The footsteps were more frequent. When I was alone, a door would suddenly swing shut. That door was partly glass and made a special sound. Maybe the draft? But the door was closed before, and it would repeat that sound multiple times. Also, sometimes felt like a cold rhythmic stream of cold air in the back of my neck in bed. My sister later told me that she heard the footsteps too, by the way. My mother always brushed it off as my imagination and I should stop bothering her. The worst experience happened, though, when I was 16 in summer break. At this point, I got partly used to the home ghost, and I knew how he felt. He came a lot closer over the years, but never showed himself. This felt so different, like not just an extremely uneasy feeling, I guess, but also the pure primal terror. I was playing games at around 2 a.m. My room door is at the right side, so it's always in my peripheral, and I always closed it. I just remember seeing the door be open in my peripheral vision, and then suddenly this dark figure with bloodshot eyes, which looked as if he was completely insane, and a painfully big grin with completely even, synchronistic teeth. I panicked so hard I fell to the side away from it. I couldn't see it anymore, but it still felt like a panic. I closed the door as fast as I could. Still felt like I switched on every light and I crawled in the corner of my bed, which was located in the corner. I didn't sleep that night or the next. After that, the feeling vanished, but the other one never came as close as before, and I never felt the cold air in my neck again. Later, we finally moved, but to a 100-year-old old farm, which is still in use but modernized a bit. We had to tear it down and the old living house to build a new one, which we did. While the construction tools were going missing and electronic devices would often short circuit or stop working altogether, I got a terrible feeling there for a good year. They were angry, I guess, because we tear down that house. But that calmed down a bit after I tried to talk them away, and now they feel more like protectors than unpleasant. Well, let's just call them entities, or subtenants. Have you experienced something like weird pitch black shadows or other apparitions? 13 years ago, my dad and I moved into an apartment here in Germany. I was 12 back then, so it took me some time to realize something was off. I had a pitch black shadow in my room, exactly in the corner over my bed. From time to time, I would feel random discomfort or even feel scared a little bit. One time I showered at night, and upon entering my dark room, a bright white light, almost like a ball, flew from the right corner, where the shadow was, to the other side of my room. I was just so shook. I immediately closed the door and I went to the living room to sit with my dad till I wasn't scared anymore. It didn't even bother him by telling him. Anyway, that's when I realized that maybe something is off. I asked my neighbors, and it turned out that an old man was living in our apartment a very long time before us, and he supposedly died asleep in his armchair. I immediately knew where that must have been. I started to also realize that the shadow I mentioned before was actually really strange. I always assumed that something was throwing shade, since the light from the streetlights and the moon would always cast different shadows into my room at night. Like a lamp and a shadow resembling it. But there was actually nothing to throw that shadow in the corner, and it was, as I said, pitch black, unlike the other shadows. Well, some years passed, and one day I realized that nothing scary had happened for some time, and the shadow's gone, just gone. I guess the old man finally left this realm or something. Maybe this isn't the place to make jokes, but maybe he was disturbed by my puberty, my awkwardness, and the first sexual encounter, who knows? Anyway, years later, 2019 actually, my dad passed away. 2 minutes away from home, and we still lived in this apartment, and for the first few months I could feel his presence. I felt like he would come around the corner any moment, or I could swear I could hear the sounds that he would make. Sometimes I felt like I saw him in the corner of my eye or a shadow or something. It was getting actually jump scares from that. Like thinking that there's something standing there walking past me, and then me screaming at nothing. But that suddenly stopped a few months after as well. The dark shadow in my room is the strangest thing I've ever experienced, especially since I was seeing it every night for years, and then it just randomly disappeared. I think my family finally realized I'm not crazy. So since I was 13 or 14, I've been having episodes of sleep paralysis, and I kept seeing different versions of the same generic black smoke humanoid creature. I didn't really think too much about it, as I thought that those were only hallucinations. So fast forward a few years later, and I was 17, and well, I saw it. I was awake, and because I was bored, pandemic had me dying. I was just sitting at my desk in one of those chairs that can spin and go in circles. At some point, I saw this tall black shadow at less than a half a meter away from my chair. I stopped spinning and turned to look at the place where I saw it in, but it was gone. I 100% saw something. I wasn't dizzy because of the motion. I wasn't tired nor dreaming. It was legit. I went upstairs to tell my family, and they looked a little scared but brushed it off as maybe one of the possible reasons that I stated above. Now, I've had lots of weird things happening only to me in this house. There were things like objects launching from their place to the floor, or disappearing and reappearing later in different places, or weird sounds in the night. The scariest experience happened when I was I was having one of those girl nights with my sisters. Just us watching a movie and then sleeping in the same room to talk and spend more time together. And during the night, after she fell asleep, I stayed on my phone for a bit when I started hearing a very specific music that I knew came from the carousel music box that my mom had. It sounded as if someone was holding the thing and walking around the hall outside my sister's room, but with the smallest of steps. I listened in absolute horror as the music was getting closer and closer, and I kid you not, the moment it got to our door, it stopped. But the sound of steps continued through the door and onto the carpet, getting quieter and quieter until it stopped as well. I was so damn scared that I woke my sister up to tell her that I wanted some water. I was too scared to tell her about what happened. The next day I went to my mom's room to see if the music box was still there, but I couldn't find it at all. I asked my sister whether she knew where it was. She told me that my mom took the thing to decorate her desk a long time ago. Therefore, it wasn't in the house that night. I didn't say anything else because I knew that it wouldn't really be believed. And well, after that, a couple months ago, now I'm 18, my grandma got very sick, and we brought her to live with us so I guess that way we could take care of her. Yesterday, my sister and I spent the night at my friend's house. We all got tested for COVID before, and our country allows it. And when my dad came to pick us up, Granny was with him in the car. That confused me because I know that she gets tired pretty easily and she doesn't really like leaving the house because of that. I asked her if there was something that was happening. She didn't really want to tell me at first, but then my dad said, she saw a ghost. After that, she finally explained that in the morning. While my sis and I were gone, she was sitting at the edge of her bed taking her meds, and she saw a body of a person as it went through the door. The thing then told her, I'm coming back, before disappearing again. I couldn't believe my ears. For context, my granny may be old and sometimes forgets things, but she never, ever in her whole life saw or heard something that wasn't there. No history of mental illness, no hallucinations from meds, nothing. Mentally, she's in a really good state, despite her age. Everyone believed it. Hell, they even believed me after I told them all the things that happened. I don't know if we saw the same entity or if there's more than one, but honestly, it doesn't bother me. I got used to it and I'm not scared anymore. I'm still not even sure if I believe in the paranormal myself or if there were logical explanations to all these events, but I'm just glad that I could get it off my chest. I'm still in shock and seriously debating all my former beliefs. Hoping my sister played one last prank. A couple of months ago, I did just that. Completely conscious, trying to convince myself to just go back to sleep because the trek to the bathroom always ends up keeping me longer. Bathroom lights are insidiously bright and rude. I closed my eyes and I willed myself to go back to sleep. I worked on ensuring myself that I would pee later, but getting up was more convenient. When I sleep in my bed, I face a wall with the closet fully open. It is a closet that you'd expect a cheap sliding door to cover, but curtains cost less. I leave them drawn because I'm lazy. I'm just a bit of a divot in the wall with a dowel hung up, not a walk-in or anything fancy. These details are important to this experience, though. So I'm laying on my side, facing the open closet, trying hard to coax myself back to sleep by closing my eyes, when the loudest noise I've ever heard erupts from the wall. It sounded like someone scratching a heavy winter jacket, but in stereo. It was like a speaker on full volume had picked up something trying to scratch an itch while bundled up, but it was rhythmic, similar to the 5 knocks one would expect as a secret passcode to gain entry to a childhood fort. I was terrified, frozen in place, thinking that I must have started to doze off and dream when my fiancé woke up out of a dead sleep and turned over in my bed with a groggy, "What the fuck was that?" As soon as the noise had started, my eyes opened and I was actively surveying the room. I was on high alert, and I was 100% awake when it happened because my brain told me that it was an intruder. It must be said that it's common for me to fully wake up at this time of night, but mind you, the sound was only a quick couple of seconds. The fear that gripped me when my practically comatose husband woke up out of his dead sleep. Had I been standing, I'd have taken a hard seat. I desperately pawed at my phone and turned on the flashlight to hopefully catch the villain in the act, but I saw nothing. To be completely honest, I expected to see a person rummaging through my dirty clothes pile for treasures. But nothing, not even a hint of movement. I started to get angry, thinking that it was our 14-year-old cat scratching clothes hung up in the closet for attention, so I scanned the room with my flashlight, and I woke the cat out of her very comfortable slumber in the hamper on the other side of the room. Still confused but awake, my husband and I conferred briefly about the sound, and I turned on my bedside lamp because, well, I was terrified. Eventually I fell asleep, but my mind couldn't get that goddamn rhythm to go away. The next morning I tried everything to debunk the quote-unquote noise. He was absolutely convinced that he had figured it out when he tugged on a small piece of exercise equipment in the closet. It was in my full view of the fateful night. It rocked, swayed, and scraped the wall with surprising volume, but it never held the cadence or static that the original sound did. We quickly debunked his theory, and he had to pull it out with 2 hands with a good amount of force to even make a sound. So we turned to check the underside of the house for rodents and or vermin. We had dealt with the raccoon issue a few years ago, but they never climbed into the walls. They just shuffled around in the dirt underneath the house. The fiber insulation between our wall and the living room, including closets, all pristine, no evidence of burrowing or chewing. I want so badly for this to be the case of asshole animals being just that, but I can't find evidence for it. If I've missed something, please tell me that I'm an idiot. I'd rather be an idiot at this point. But I'm also hoping that it was my sister playing one last batshit prank on me. Joke is on her. I never peed the bed. Does anybody know what this thing was? About a year back, I had just gotten back from my shift, and it was about 2:15 a.m. by the time that I got all my stuff and put it all away and changed into some comfortable clothes. I was the on-call guy, so I would be coming and leaving at random hours. I had trained my dog to wait by the door when she needed to go out and do her business, and by the time that I'd walked back into my living room, she was whining, a sign that she really couldn't wait any longer. As soon as I opened up the door to my backyard, she took off into the darkness, and I sat there, looking at something on my phone, probably Amazon, but I can't remember. It was taking her a little bit longer than normally, so I got up and I started heading out into the pitch black. It wasn't unusual for her to chase crickets or lose track of time, so every once in a while I'd have to go looking around for her to go back inside. When I had just left the back porch and onto the grass, I heard my dog yelp. I couldn't tell if she had been spooked or hurt. My neighbors were real pieces of work, so I assumed that they had been out messing around and threw something at her, which I'd have to then yell at them for on a couple of other occasions. I ran out into the yard and barely saw her outline by the light of another neighbor's lanterns that was just strong enough for me to discern her from the shadows. She was crouched low in the back by the fence between my yard and my neighbor's yard, and as I got close to her, I saw that she was shaking pretty bad. I'm by no means a pushover. I'm 6'1", and at this point weighed around 270 pounds, but seeing her shaking like that made me immediately nervous. By the way, I've since lost 100 pounds and I put on more muscle, but I was still not someone people messed with. She was a German Shepherd Chow mix, and even though she wasn't as big as typical shepherds, I'd seen her stand down some pretty tough characters, so her being scared was a huge red flag. I tried to guide her toward the house, deciding to take a look at her, and came back later to look for whatever had her so spooked. But as soon as I stepped towards her, she started growling and fixed her gaze on something to my left. I turned, and not 50 feet away on the other side of the fence was the biggest dog I'd ever seen in my life. I could only see its outline because it was between me and the lanterns, but the thing's head was barely below the 5-foot fence. We get coyotes around where I live, but this thing dwarfed them, and coyotes never went to people's backyards. They just wander around the streets looking for trash or neighborhood stray cats. We all just stood there for a good 2 minutes before I came back to my senses and slowly reached for my dog's collar. I got a death grip on it, pulled my dog around toward the house, and took off in a dead sprint. My dog was hesitant at first, but once I got a bit of distance between us and the back fence, it was like she broke out of a trance, and she beat me to the back door. By the time I got there, she was whining when I flung the door open, and we both barreled into the living room, and I double-locked the door. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night, and she didn't go outside that night again for the rest of her life at that particular location. She was about 13 when this happened, and passed a couple of months ago. Aside from this night and a couple of other occasions, she lived a really happy life. I've looked up every big predator in the area. I live in Arizona, by the way, and I haven't found anything that comes anywhere near close to resembling this thing.